Hey everyone, welcome to the tutorial video on the first of the Australian government's macroeconomic goals, which is strong and sustainable economic growth. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start with the meaning as per the study design, which is essentially what it is. Hopefully you're not as confused as our good friend Homer down there by the end of the video. All right, so what is strong and sustainable economic growth? Well, just a bit of theory here as to why we even have this as a goal. Economic growth is important because it helps us maximize our national living standards. Okay, so that's kind of like why governments do everything that they do is to maximize living standards. And the reasoning behind that is, well, as GDP rises, and don't forget GDP and economic growth are the same thing, as GDP rises, incomes rise, and therefore our access to goods and services also rise. All right, so that's all great, but we can't just have the highest growth possible, okay, as then there would be negative consequences that wouldn't be so good for the economy and its people, okay, and those are, well, we can't have crazy economic growth so much that our aggregate demand outstrips our aggregate supply. We learnt about that a little bit earlier because what will happen there is we'll have economy-wide shortages across most markets. It's going to jack the prices up. And as you guys know, with inflation, when we have high inflation, we actually have a fall in our real incomes, fall in our purchasing power, and so that's actually going to reduce living standards. And that's not a good thing. Okay, so we can't just have strong economic growth, we also need um, the growth not to be so high that it causes high inflation. Another reason that we can't have crazy economic growth is, well, we can't just get all of this crazy economic growth and increase our incomes because we're making lots of stuff. We can't just get all that from borrowing money. And this one specifically talks about borrowing money from overseas. Okay, so it would be really easy for the government just to borrow, government and businesses actually, just to borrow a stack of money to start building new factories and giving their employees pay rises, and everyone's great. Everything's great. Incomes are up, access to goods and services are great. Everybody's really happy, except for the time where it comes where you've actually got to pay that debt back and with interest. And so you don't want to get into a position where the country becomes insolvent, which is a fancy word for saying can't pay their bills. Um, and so what's really important here is we have a level of economic growth where we don't have a high amount of foreign debt because you've got to pay it back. And then the third thing we can't have crazy high growth as a restraint is, well, we don't want to deplete our natural resources to a crazy level. Yeah, so we can get amazing growth if we just cut down all the trees, if we just dig all the coal out of the ground, if we do all of these things, if we fish all the fish out of the oceans, we're going to get amazing economic growth, high incomes. It's going to be awesome, but only for a period of time. Yeah, because at the end of the day, um, that's then going to actually cause a fall in the aggregate supply side. And as you guys know, that's then going to cause widespread shortages. And then we're going to get back to this inflation problem. All right. So there's three things that kind of hold our level of economic growth back a little bit. And it's we don't want a level of economic growth that causes high inflation, high external debts, or depletion of natural resources. So the definition or the goal here really has three additional elements to ensure our economy can grow well into the future. So we want the highest possible growth rate that keeps inflation to acceptable levels, that maintains external stability, as in we don't have crazy debts to foreign governments and foreign entities, and the highest possible growth that doesn't overuse a nation's natural resources. All right, so if I'm ever asking you guys to say a 2-mark define question on what the goal of strong and sustainable economic growth is, I need these three things in addition to the highest possible growth rate and the percentage. Okay, so the highest possible growth rate that keeps in mind those three things is considered to be approximate 3 to 3.5% per annum or per year. Now that number is really important for you to remember connected to this particular goal. Every single question that asks you to link how something affects the goal, you have to put this percentage in. Capiche? All right, and those that want to go an extra mile can put those other three characteristics in there as well. The percentage here is really, really important every single time you talk about this goal. So that was the meaning of what the goal is. It's not just 3 to 3.5%, it's also those three other elements. Now we're going to move on to the measurement. Okay, well, how do we actually measure the achievement or non-achievement of this particular goal? And don't ask me why I chose that picture of Homer. It makes no sense. It doesn't have anything to do with measurement. It's just Homer. All right, so how do we measure GDP? Well, we've got this thing called value added. Okay, so at every point along the production process, each producer is going to add a little bit of value. All right, so if we think of a farmer might buy some seeds for $100, they then plant those seeds and then they sell the wheat onto a processor for $500. Well, they've added $400 worth of value to that particular product at that point in time, and then so that $400 goes in. And then when that person who buys the wheat processes the wheat and then sells what they bought for $500 for $1,000, well, they've added an extra 500, so on and so forth, all the way along the production process until it gets to the final value. Okay, so the final value, the final value is essentially what consumers pay. Yeah, consumers or businesses or governments or whoever the end consumer is, that's what goes into GDP. So please don't make the mistake of thinking that you add up all the final things. No, it's just the value added along the way, which coincidentally is just the final value that the final consumer pays. And then the final thing is it's adjusted for inflation. So that's why we talk about real GDP. Because we don't want to be chasing a growth rate of 3 to 3.5% and think we've achieved that, which means we've made 3 to 3.5% more stuff, when we've just been making the same amount of stuff, but it's just gotten more expensive, yeah, due to either demand or cost inflation reasons. So the goal of 3 to 3.5% is real GDP adjusted for inflation. Okay, so usually that will come down from the nominal amount. We then take out the inflation to get the real amount, and then that's what we want to grow by 3 to 3.5% every year. So let's practice. Okay, now got some relatively simple numbers here. You're going to need a calculator to do this. So we've got 3 years of nominal GDP in trillions. These are just made up numbers. It's close-ish, but just made up numbers. And then with an inflation rate. So what we're going to do here is we're going to practice how to actually calculate this. I don't know in the exam if they're going to ask you to do it. It will be much easier than this if they do. It'll be factors of 10 or 20%, so much easier to do in your head. But how you're actually going to do this is, don't forget, nominal is higher than real when we have an increase in prices. Yeah, so for this 2006 to 2007 year, well, let's go 2006. For that 2006 year, there's 2% inflation. So you could do this a really tricky way, but we know that the real GDP for 2016 is going to be less than 1.4 trillion. So a really easy way to do this calculation, guys, is you get a full number of 1, you take away what the inflation rate is, and 2% as represented by a number is 0.02. And so you get a whole number and you take away 0.02 to give you 0.98. And if you can't do that maths in your head, then you need to practice to do that maths in the head for the exam, but also for life. So we get a number of 0.98, and then we multiply the original number by that 0.98. So 1.4 times 0.98 will actually give you the real GDP. That will have taken the inflation rate out. So I want you guys to pause the video and practice for the rest of these. Okay, so once you've done that, we're going to get going now on the answers. And there's the formula there, which I probably should have given you before. And here we go. So this is what you should have gotten for your inflation, for your real GDP in trillions. And I just rounded here to 3 or 2 decimal places. If you didn't get these answers, go back over the video and back over my explanation until you fully understand. And it's really in that formula. Yeah, take the number 1 minus the inflation rate, and then whatever answer you get there, and that's why it's in brackets, you multiply that by the nominal amount. Okay, so that was yearly. So if we go up, you'll see these are yearly numbers. Sometimes what you might get in some data in your SACs or exams is quarterly numbers. So you just need to do a little bit of an extra step here to get your annual rate of growth. So all you're going to do here is just add up the quarters for the first, 4 sections, and then add up the next 4, and then those become your yearly. You notice it doesn't end in December, but that doesn't matter. Okay, and then that's how then you do that calculation. So that's your growth rate from 1.35 trillion to 1.4. All right, so that's how we measure GDP. So we do the value added at or final value method, and then we adjust for inflation. Now we talk about why we have this particular goal. Okay, and there are 3 reasons why we pursue economic growth in study design, and those are: it lowers the unemployment rate. When we grow, there is a growth in real income. And when we have economic growth, there's an increased ability to provide essential services. So we're just going to go through about how that actually works. So the first one of lowering the unemployment rate is, well, if we're making more stuff, and this goes through to the earlier key knowledge point, if we're making more stuff, well, we need more people then to make that stuff. So there's an increased derived demand for labour. How do we get a growth in real incomes from a growth in GDP? Well, when we have more jobs, we then have increased incomes. Okay, and then don't forget, we adjust our goal, our 3 to 3.5% for inflation. So if we're achieving our 3 to 3.5%, it means that we're growing more than the rate of inflation, because our inflation goal is lower than our GDP goal. So if we're hitting both our GDP goal and our inflation goal, it means that we're growing faster than the rate of inflation, which is a good thing for real income. And then finally, increased ability to provide essential services. Well, when we make more stuff, our companies pay more tax, we pay more income tax because people are working more, and then we buy more stuff because we've got more incomes, and so governments get more GST as well. So this one's all about the role of government, and when the government gets more tax, then they can provide more essential services such as healthcare, welfare, so on and so forth. And then overall, what's the benefit of doing all these things? Well, we all link back to living standards. Okay, and we've kind of come full circle now on this particular thing where right from the top we said, well, when we grow GDP, it increases living standards, and this is really why those 3 things are benefits. Okay, so that's it for this particular one. If anything was unclear, guys, please go over, take your time on these particular videos. Otherwise, you can continue on with your learning activities. Thanks, guys.